Hi, guys. Welcome to the Art of Healing podcast. I'm your host, Pearls.
And I'm Paris.
And today we're going to be talking about how trauma affects the body's stress response.
And that's little T and big T. And we'll get into it. But before we do that, we just want to all start off on the same foot. So let's just take some deep breaths. If you're not walking, if you're not driving, if it's safe for you to do so, close down your eyes. If not, don't worry. You can still breathe in. So we're just going to breathe in through the nose. Inhale. And really slow exhale through the mouth. Just tuning into the body. One more time. Inhale. And exhale nice and slow. One last inhale. And exhale. Amazing. Right, so we'll get into it for this afternoon, this podcast episode. So where do we start?
Let's start with what type of stress responses are there?
So we did briefly touch on this, I guess. The first episode we
Yeah.
did, we didn't go too deeply into it. So I guess when it comes to the stress response, first thing first is that the stress response is completely normal. Your body is meant to respond to stress, right? As we mentioned before, the problem is when we get stuck in that stress response. And there are actually 5 types of stress responses that the nervous system can go through, which are fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and flop. So we'll go through each one, how exactly they show up in your life, and of course, what that means. Because, all right, cool, some of us know when we're stressed, but we don't know exactly what that looks like. And that's the problem. And that's when most people don't know when they're stressed, because they're going through stuff, acting in certain ways, and it's just a stress response. I think typically with fight, for example, a good example of what that looks like would be, let's say us in our relationship, right? You tell me, hey babe, can I, can you pick up your clothes please? Because it looks a bit messy. And my response is, oh, why are you nagging at me? Oh, why are you always on my back? Like, I just go off on this tirade and I'm almost attacking you essentially, because what my body is interpreting a very safe, very calm way of you saying
A reasonable request.
A reasonable request as an attack, because I'm already in this state of stress. So its response is to fight you essentially. And that comes through as an argument, which isn't very great when you're in a relationship, because then what does that communicate to you? Oh, I can't
ask for reasonable requests.
I can't speak to my boyfriend. And then in turn, that triggers your stress response. And then what happens? If you go into fight, you go, well, you're a dickhead.
Then there's an argument.
Yeah. And thus arguments are created. You see, arguments are just us being triggered by, certain stimuli, certain conversations. And what's happening is there's an emotion coming up in that trigger. And then that gets projected out in the words, the conversations, our actions. Sometimes you might slam a door, you might storm out the room. In really extreme cases, that can turn violent. It can turn physical. It can be punching, slapping, pushing from both sides. Men and women do it, of course. But this is all just coming from a stress response where the body is interpreting what is happening as danger.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And we don't think of it in this way. We think that these people are acting out or behaving inappropriately, which they are. They are. But there is actually a reason behind it, and it is due to the dysregulation. It's due to them being in that stress response. So that's fight. Then we have freeze.
Freeze.
Or should we go into
flight? Let's do flight. Because fight
do...
and flight, I feel like that is a phrase that everyone's familiar with. So let's do the two together. So
Yeah.
flight is when you request something of me and I just run away. So if you're like, hey babe, can you please wash the dishes? And instead of arguing with you or doing it, I'm like, cool, I'm just gonna dip out. This is actually too much for me to engage in conversation with you or to meet this request. I'm just gonna leave. That's a very mild version of like an example, but it's essentially when something happens that triggers you and your response is to just leave the environment rather than confront it, engage in the situation. You're like, actually, this is emotionally too much for me. I'm overwhelmed. I'm about to leave.
So so that could show up as a difficult conversation that you're having with someone, and they say something that, kind of triggers that response. And rather than addressing what they're saying or responding, your answer is to walk out the door and disappear and, not engage in the conversation that's being had. And it's not necessarily because you don't want to, or that that's what's communicated in the action. It's that your body is triggered, put into the stress response, and then it's gone, let's run, because I need to keep you safe. Because again, it's bringing up emotions that are overwhelming to you at that time.
Yeah.
And these emotions aren't necessarily going to hurt you, but to a dysregulated nervous system, those emotions are overwhelming you.
Yeah.
And your body's like, I need to protect you from this. Let's get out of there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's funny because I was having a conversation with my sister about something that happened years ago when she was like 14, 15. We basically went to TK Maxx, and I said to her, I was like, cool, you can buy whatever you want. I think she had like a school trip coming up, and I'll pay for it. And she picked up whatever she wanted, and I was like, I just need you to go to the till and pay. Because you can have my card, you just got to tap it. You don't have to put a number in, nothing. But the only reason I didn't want to go to the till was because I knew someone there and I just didn't really have the capacity to engage in conversation. So I was like,
a type of response as well.
That was also a type of response. Yeah, I was like, I was trying to flight, and my sister.
You passed the baton to her.
I passed the baton to her. I was like, you know what? I'm happy to pay, but you go to the till, just tap it, check out, it'll be sweet. And she was very overwhelmed with this request because she was only 15. She'd never used the card. She'd never gone to the till on her own at this point. She's always had someone with her. And her response was to not communicate why she didn't want to do it. She just left the shop. She just left the shop. And we were laughing about this the other day, which is why it's like funny that this is the podcast that we're doing today. But yeah, she just left the shop. But it was because obviously we spoke about it, and she's like, yeah, I'd never used the card before, and I was really overwhelmed and I didn't want to do it. And so I just left. But obviously years later, she's able to communicate what happened to her in that moment. And it was just that it was a new challenge for her that she hadn't done. She didn't know how to say, explain what was happening to her inside. She was like, cool, I'm just going to leave.
And this is the difference between a point of safety when your body's in safety and a point of stress. Like further down the line, she's able to say, oh yeah, I just didn't feel confident in doing what you asked of me. But in that moment, she was stressed. She couldn't communicate that. And this is the point. When you're in the stress response, most of your functioning closes down. Your focus narrows. Your heart starts beating fast. The adrenaline and cortisol is racing because you've got to react to the situation very quickly. So you're not going to be thinking logically. You're thinking survival. The logical thing would be, sis, like honestly, like I don't feel comfortable doing that. But that's from a regulated place where you feel cool doing that. But when you're triggered, it's running out the shop, and you probably being like, lady, where are you going?
She just, it was just the funniest thing ever, and we were laughing about it. But the God works in mysterious ways, so obviously I went and paid, and lo and behold, it ended up on the till that I didn't want to end up on. So I had to face my demons too.
So there you are.
It wasn't that bad. It was just, it's one of those things. In the moment you think, oh, actually, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. But when it got to it, it wasn't the end of the world.
That's it. So fight looks like confronting the thing with, I guess, aggression, with force, with resistance. Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, flight is avoiding the thing, running away from, separating your body essentially as far away as possible from the perceived threat. Yeah. And of course, interestingly, going to a till isn't going to kill you, right? No. It isn't going to cause you harm. It isn't going to put your life in danger. But this is the beauty of the stress response. Your nervous system is wired in a way where it doesn't understand that isn't dangerous. If it perceives a threat, then it's a threat. And to your body, a threat means danger to survival. Obviously, danger to survival leads to death. Your body's main job is to what? Protect you, keep you alive. Yeah. So thank you so much. We give thanks to our bodies, our nervous systems for doing that. But at the same time, we live in a world, a lot further advanced than our nervous system is. So our nervous system's in caveman times, where we're living in an age where we've got TVs constantly feeding us information. Yeah. We've got cars going, which have only been around for 100 or so years. So it's like even that sound of an engine is very new to us. Yeah. It's not something that our nervous systems are used to. We don't really think about these things, but it's an unnatural sound. It's not like something that's been passed down to us. Our nervous systems aren't used to it. So even like living on a busy street.
Which is interesting because obviously here, where we live now, the cars are constantly going because we're near a main road. Yep. And it constantly at night, it's like, hey, what's that sound? Yeah. Because I'm not used to it. So it's like, oh.
So we lived in an apartment that was in the city before, but there was no passing traffic. And now where we live, we're on a main road. So there is traffic, obviously. And when we first moved, we didn't sleep like very well. We kept getting woken up by all the passing cars. The reason being, of course, we wasn't used to the sound. But like if it was passing birds tweeting, that wouldn't have been,
it's fine.
triggering to us, because your nervous system's used to that sound. It's very calming. One of the reasons going into nature is so good is because you can hear the sounds of the birds, you can hear the sounds of the animals, and actually, when you hear the sounds of birds, this is so interesting. It's stimulating to the nervous system in the way that it causes you to go into the parasympathetic, into the rest and digest. You know why?
Because your body associates the bird song with safety.
Yes, because birds only sing when there is no predators around. So if ever you are in the forest and you can't hear birds, one,
Run.
it means they're not there, or two, it means that they're being quiet because there's a perceived threat around.
Interesting.
So yeah, basically probably run is the go into flight, get out of here. But yeah, when you're in nature and you hear birds, obviously our nervous system has been around birds from way back when we used to live in trees and in forests and jungles. So we intuitively know that birds safe, which is and that's why you hear birds and you're like, I like that sound. Whereas you hear cars and it's like, what is that? Why is it? But like your rational mind knows it's a car. It's not the most annoying sound in the world. Like you can hardly hear it really, but when things are quiet, your body's still scanning the environment for little threats, trying to keep you safe. And it's like, boom, there's the trigger.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then of course, so that's fight, flight, and then we've got the freeze state, which looks like your snowman. This is an interesting one because it manifests in a lot of ways. One typical way, which I think is very prevalent in society at the moment, is coming home after a long day at work, sitting on the sofa and just spending hours doom scrolling on your phone.
Yeah.
Or
just monging.
Just monging.
Just monging.
Just zoning out.
Just
monging.
coming home and being brain dead. Like,
yeah. And honestly, it's so debilitating and it's so common. Like it's something that until recently, we got into this work, I realized that I did it from time to time. But I notice it in so many people now. And there's so much conversation, and even people coming to us and saying like, I'm stuck in freeze state. What do I do? How do I get out of it? Like, what's wrong with me? And it's like, first, nothing's wrong with you. Your body is just overwhelmed because you've probably not dealt with the trauma. So this is giving you a stressful emotional response, which you're carrying around with you. Plus you've been at work all day, which unfortunately in the society that we live in, most people's jobs cause because there's deadlines. You've got to be as productive as possible.
It's all about efficiency from the minute you get there to the minute you leave. And sometimes even before you get there, they're like on your ass. Like.
Yeah, and even if it isn't these things, again, sadly, most people don't like their job. So even the thought of going to a place that you don't enjoy being is stressful. Waking up in the morning to an alarm when you're still tired because you probably spent all night watching TV to try and disassociate and detach from the stress, which I understand.
Or get some like form of dopamine in your life.
Right. And then you get hit with this alarm, instant stress, you drink your coffee, you're rushed out, you're stuck in traffic, you get to work, stress. So your body's being pumped. You get home, what happens? Okay, all those stresses are now gone. The cortisol then drops. So does the adrenaline. Guess what else happens? You drop with it.
Yeah.
And then you just...
It's like your body goes on autopilot and takes control and you're just there. It's a little bit like in Get Out.
It's exactly like Get Out when she's doing the
and he's there but he can't do anything
that is such a good way of putting it, because the T is like the trigger, and then he's aware that he's in his body still, but his body's just completely frozen to it, or
can't do nothing,
not reacting, just like I don't want to be here, but
like inside he's like, hey, hang on, something's not quite right, move me.
So it's an interesting one and very common in society, and it is, again, it's just a stress response where your body is so overwhelmed with what's happening that when it gets the time to switch off, it's still feeling stressed, but not enough to be pumping you with what has been keeping you going that whole time. And it's just like, cool, you just crash, essentially. That's what couch potatoing is, bed rotting is.
Guess when you sit in your car, when you get home and you just sit in your car for like 15, 20 minutes before you go inside. When you have a shower, you sit on the bed for ages. It's all the same.
Something that I used to always do is I again, didn't realize that at the time, but I would have like a shower or a bath, and then I would just lay on my bed for like forever. And I used to think like I was just relaxing, but I literally would be there for at least an hour. Like the bed would be wet. I wouldn't dry myself. I would just get out of the shower and just flop on the bed, and then it would just be
It's like having a shower took all your energy.
Yeah, it really is. And now I realize, oh, it's because like, I was stressed, and I guess being in the shower, it has somewhat of a calming effect. And then all of the stress catches up on you, and I guess the hormones that go with it get released, and then crash, boom. And your body's just like,
I'm done.
I can't, like, I literally can't move anymore. So it's, so that is fight. We've got flight, and that's freeze. And the next is fawn.
Yeah.
So fawn is an interesting one that isn't spoken about as much, but this is where I guess chronic people pleasing
shows
up in their life, right? Because what it is fawn is the response of like agreeability. It's not setting or respecting the boundary to the perceived threat or predator or narcissist or however that is going along. You basically you're agreeable. You go along with it because to you,
going along is easier than confronting the threat.
Yes.
So
and confronting the threat might make the threat worse, right? So let me just go along with it. Let me just get this done. I should really say no here, but like, basically you're not respecting your own boundaries, and you're just pleasing them, even if it goes against your values, your morals, your beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. So
this is probably going to sound like a very wild example, but if you watch Prison Break, you see Teabag.
Yes.
And everyone who took his pocket,
oh my God,
that's fawning. It was easier for them to take the pocket than take him head on. So that's like an example of like it happening in real life, in drama. So yeah, if you've seen Prison Break, you know Teabag. Basically anyone who took his pocket, they're fawning.
For anyone that hasn't seen Prison Break, just to give you a brief description of what it is that he was doing. Basically, they're in this prison. There's this guy called Teabag, and he was kind of like, I guess, the king of the prison run stuff.
I wouldn't say he was the king, but he was like the king of pedos.
Yeah, but like everyone was scared of him. He was like, he was just this crazy.
He had no boundaries in like what he would do. Yeah.
But one of the things that he'd do to manipulate people and like put them under his spell was he'd pull out his pocket and get them to hold it. So he would have like these younger people following him around, hanging off his pocket essentially. But like he would do it. There would be a brief moment where they would look at the pocket, and then they would just do it.
Yeah. And so basically it was easier to just do what he wanted as opposed to like meet the threat of him, which would basically look like a physical violence of some sort. So it was easier for them.
You can imagine they're in prison. It's dramatized what would happen. But yeah, so that is such a good example of what fawn is. That is literally, if you haven't seen it, just type in Teabag Prison Break and you'll understand what it means. It's like the perfect depiction of fawn. Yeah, and then we've got flop. Again, something that isn't spoken about typically. Fight, and freeze. But the other two, fawn and flop. Flop is probably one of the most genius stress responses that there are. But this can actually look like sudden fainting.
Yes.
Which is okay. Let's say,
for example.
Yes.
On my birthday, when I cut my nose. So on my 6th birthday, I tripped. I had a knife in my hand. I sliced my nose. Blood was everywhere. You can imagine.
What kind of birthday was this?
It was an unfortunate one. I had a birthday party. It was going well. I was about to cut the cake. I should not have been allowed to have the knife. That's a whole different story. But like, I tripped. I cut my nose. There was blood everywhere. I had to go to the hospital. But mom can't see blood. She's gone. So now dad's got to look after me and mom. So basically she's like passed out. She can't at the sight of blood. She's finished. Right. So that's an example of like flop. This is actually, the situation is way too traumatic for me to endure.
Yep.
I've just switched off.
Yeah.
I've gone on standby mode.
Body shuts down and thinks, right, we're basically dead anyway. Let's at least fake death and see if we can get out of the situation. Hopefully when I come back online, everything's going to be cool. And what this looks like in the animal kingdom, if you've got a pet cat and it's ever brought a mouse home, and then all of a sudden this dead mouse that was in its mouth is running around the house, that is the flop response in perfect real time. So, excuse me, what is happening is the prey, essentially, in this case, has been caught by this predator. It's obviously not going to overpower a cat. It's in its jaws. It's like, I'm done for. So the stress response is, let me fake death, trick the predator to think that I'm not alive anymore. So the predator might loosen its grip. And then what does the predator does? It thinks, cool, this mouse is dead. It puts the mouse down to look at it. And as soon as that split second of the release is gone, the mouse is, boom, gone, running around your house. And you're trying to catch it. It used to happen all the time when we had cats and they would bring mice home. the cat would drop it and it'd be like, why? And this mouse that was dead a second ago is now running around the house and I've got to catch it. But that's what it looks like in the animal kingdom. For us, it looks like fainting because, of course, we don't get caught in the jaws of animals anymore, fortunately.
Thank God.
But our body still perceives threats outwardly as that, taking place. So if you've ever fainted,
and I guess it's more automatic than conscious. Like with mice, I guess they're a bit more conscious of like what they're doing in a way, I guess, because like
I would imagine it's still intuitive as well. I would have to ask the mice, but I'd imagine,
I'm intrigued by that.
The same way it works with our nervous system, we're not really in control of the response. It's just something that is wired within us to keep us alive. So the mice just do it because their nervous system is wired that way. The same way, like if they see the predator, they run.
Yeah.
Like, when prey is a child, it's not like, oh, there's a lion, I should run away from this. Its nervous system already knows, run away from it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It doesn't wait to find out if that was bad.
Like deer, they just go.
Yeah, like there's no chance, gone. Like, whereas of humans, for example, I guess because some things are unnatural to us, it's like, oh, when you tell a kid don't touch the oven because it's hot, don't touch the stove because it's hot, they do it anyway because they have to learn and teach their nervous system that that's wrong. But like, in the animal kingdom, they don't have that chance to test out the
that
threat.
chance means death.
Is death. Yeah, so that their responses are even more intuitive than ours, I guess, and that's because they live in nature. We live very unnaturally with the technology that we have, with the cars and with these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So
it's interesting, and I guess it's like, when animals cross the road, you think like, avoid the motorway. Why did you die? Like, stay away from the car. It's quite obvious, but I guess it's the same thing working in real time for them. They don't know that car necessarily means danger because it's not natural. It's not something that they're hardwired to avoid or stay away from or like perceive as a threat.
Plus, it's not a sound in nature that they're used to, or it's been conditioned into them. They don't use cars, they don't drive them, none of that. So, and I guess it's the same for us. Like, that's why it triggers like a thing if you hear the sound in the night or of cars going by. It's because actually we're not naturally in tune with that. It's not part of nature.
Exactly. So if there's any biologists, animalologists, or whatever field that would be representative of people that would know a bit more about that, let us know what your thoughts are on that, because I would love to find out. So that's all 5 of them covered.
Yeah, that's all 5.
What would you say is the most typical? What comes up the most out of those 5?
Ooh, I think fight. I think most people are in fight mode. I think that shows up probably a lot in relationships. I think if you feel like you're always annoyed or getting triggered, and I think also as well, like working in office environments with other people, that can trigger it a lot. I think having like, even if your job is not stressful, I think that there are things that cause stress in that way, which probably trigger you a lot. I think especially in things like sales jobs where they're like constantly yelling at you and whatnot, it's like it's adding up.
Stress.
Yeah, it's like adding up. And the thing is, even if you don't respond to it there and then, you're absorbing that nonetheless. So I think, it shows up in other places. So yeah, I think fight is probably the most common one.
Yeah. And this is the thing as well, is that when it comes to stress, of course, we mentioned it in podcast 1, episode 1, and that it's become normalized. And of course, stress is normal, but being constantly under stress isn't. But the reality is, things that actually stress you out is there's an underlying emotion that is under the stress. The stress is essentially the symptom of what you're feeling underneath. Yeah. So it's like, what emotion is causing the stress? So when we look at it in terms of like how trauma affects the body in the stress response, we often think trauma is the event that took place. So like, if I was in a car crash, my trauma is the car crash. No. The trauma is the psychological and emotional response to it. So the psychological being like the way you think about it. Oh, that was horrible. I can't ever get in a car anymore. Yeah. The emotional being like, yo, I nearly died. It was painful. I had a long recovery.
It was very scary. I'm afraid of getting in cars now.
Right.
Because every time I go near a car, it makes me feel anxious. I'm sweating. I'm panicking. My heart's beating faster.
So let's break that down. So you get into a car and it makes you feel stressed, right? Every time you think about getting in a car, it makes you feel stressed. All right, is stress the problem, or is it the trauma, the emotion behind that, which is triggering the stress response? Because the stress response would be the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or flop, right? And when it comes to healing ourselves and releasing, the past event, it's about addressing the way we think about it, which is what typically talk therapy is for. But then also addressing how we feel about it.
And creating safety back in the body again.
Exactly. And that's the emotional response to what happened. Essentially what it is imagine like a a pressure cooker, right?
Mm-hmm.
The emotion that you have is this pressure cooker that's turned on, and it's building. This pressure is in there, right? And the stress is, if you've ever used one, it's kind of like a kettle. It goes
Yeah.
when it's pressure in, I guess. That's like your body releasing some of that emotional buildup that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it doesn't release all of it, because the reason it's there in the first place is because why? The body's protecting you from it, because it doesn't want you to be overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
So your body, like, it signals death. This thing happened. That was danger. You don't want to feel it, because if you feel it, it's going to overwhelm you. It's trying to protect you. The problem is, it's causing problems in your life. It's showing up in your relationships. It's showing up in your work. It's showing up in your ability to show up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're not looking after yourself. You're not doing the things that bring you joy. You're not communicating. You're avoiding social situations. Yeah. It's really a debilitating thing that all comes back to the fact that we're just not allowing this emotion to be processed, or we don't know how or why we should process the emotion in the first place. And that's why doing the somatic exercises and starting working with your body and the relationship you have is so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, of course, something that we preach and practice on a daily basis, is because you need, like you said, to bring the safety back into your body first, because there's no point trying to address all of your trauma, if that's big T or little t, which maybe we'll touch in a second. It's also about first bringing your body into safety so it can deal with it, because a body that it doesn't feel safe isn't going to heal, because healing isn't a priority. You staying alive is.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So like, I guess like big T typically looks like
big events in your life. So it could be like childhood trauma. Maybe you experienced some physical abuse. Maybe you were in a car crash, something like that. And then I guess like smaller trauma is more like day-to-day stresses of life. So for example, rushing to work stress, financial stress maybe as well is probably like a much smaller trauma. It's not, it's it's like on a more day-to-day, smaller scale, whereas like big T is like big events, big things that happen in your life, like the loss of a loved one. And they have like a larger impact over a longer period of time, whereas like the smaller day-to-day stresses of like boss, work, finances, moving house and whatnot, they're like small.
Because it's one of those ones you often meet people that say, what's wrong with me? I've never experienced any trauma. There's nothing obvious to me. This big thing happened to me. No one in my family's died. There was no traumatic events where I was injured or hurt or at threat. But like, I still have this feeling like, what's wrong with me? I keep having these symptoms of the stress response. And it's like, that's because that's big T. That's like, in your face, it's obvious, but little T is kind of sneaky. It's gradual. It builds up on you. It's like, emotional neglect, your needs not being met as a child might be a little T that shows up in your life. And that doesn't necessarily mean your parents didn't love you, but the way that you needed the love, or you needed the safety wasn't given to you, and you don't realize it because obviously as a child it wasn't that obvious and you didn't feel it. So it's like, going back and realizing, oh right, that need wasn't met.
Yeah, and also, trauma is subjective. How you experience and respond to trauma and stress is different for every person. So something I might find traumatic or stressful, you might not necessarily find traumatic. For example, my sister might be really upset that mum and dad were 20 minutes late to pick her up because, she found that upsetting, stressful, traumatic. And, it might make her feel, it's made her feel, oh, they don't love me as much. They don't care about me, etc. Whereas like, if they're late 20 minutes to pick me up, I'll be like, okay, cool, you were busy, no problem. So each person experiences each event differently. And that's not to say just because to someone else, it doesn't seem traumatic or stressful, that it's not something that would upset you or make you feel a certain way. So that's something to remember as well. Like, it's very different for every single person, and it's subjective to like your experience. We could have the same job, and our boss might be equally as awful to both of us, but I might respond to that stress terribly, and you just, water off a duck's back. So it's about how you experience it, and also, I guess, your capacity to experience the stress and trauma
in the first place,
and how your body responds to it. But again, it comes back to whatever stress and trauma you do experience. It's about coming out of that response, creating safety in the body, letting your mind and your body know that actually it's safe. I can enter rest and digest again, and I can start to, bring on back bodily functions back on, and just, get into rest and digest and start doing things normally. Yeah,
I'm glad you said that, because I think there's a misconception on what trauma is and how it affects, like, something that most people kind of play away is like, oh, like how often do you hear of like people sharing stories and the person responds with, oh, that's not that bad. Or like, oh, I can't understand why you're like, get over it, and it's like, it's not about how you think it is.
It's about their experience of it.
And it's about their experience of it, how their nervous system has internalized that, how their nervous system felt in that moment, and you know, how it's been unable to process that, and what is still being carried around. It's got nothing to do, like, you know, me knocking over a glass and my parent calling me an idiot doesn't sound like a big thing, but in that moment that could have triggered me in a way where it caused so much distress that I wasn't able to emotionally process it. And now I have this belief that I'm an idiot. And now whenever I do something wrong, very triggering for me, I run away, or I just avoid trying to do stuff altogether, because to me, if I do it, someone might call me an idiot. And then that,
and like little things like this have such a knock-on effect. And I think a lot of people don't really realize. You know, there was someone on our live who said that they had a fear of hurting their head.
Oh yeah.
Remember? Yeah. And then Paris recommended that she do the 5 Wives, and she looked into it, and then it realized that actually it came down to something that happened in her childhood. And it was like, when you look back at it, actually, you know, it was a small conversation that took place, or you know, but it obviously had a knock-on effect on her later on in her life. And it's like, even the tiniest things that we don't think had that much of an effect on us actually do shape who we are as adults. And a lot of that stuff happens when you're in childhood.
The majority of it. Yeah. So, and yeah, just to touch on 5 Whys, if you're wondering, oh, what's that? It's basically a method to get to the root cause of your beliefs. So let's say I have a belief that, I don't know, I'm not good enough, or like I look silly in what I wear. So the question would be like, why do I feel silly? And then once I have the answer to that, which let's say I don't know, is I don't know, I look fat in it. Why do I feel like I look fat in it? Because someone called me fat once. Well, why did they call you fat? Because I used to be overweight, but I'm not now. Why does that? You know, you kind of, maybe not the best example, but basically you ask the 5 Whys over and over again, and you'll get to the root cause, and eventually you're like, oh, this is why this is showing up in my life, and this is why I'm behaving in this way, or acting this way, or thinking or feeling this way.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful little method that you can start doing. But yeah, it's interesting, you know, just to touch on it. Big T, little t, doesn't matter. They'll both show up your life as the stress response, as you being triggered by certain things that aren't necessarily anything to do with what happened to you in the past.
Yeah.
But because the emotion is still there, it triggers you and it causes you to go into these states. And once you're in these states, most of us stay in them, which is also the problem. We're chronically stressed, which translates to chronically underfeeling, chronically not processing our emotions, chronically
not releasing it,
chronically repressing, suppressing, or avoiding them, chronically not releasing them. It becomes a whole problem. But like we mentioned, you know, when you start regulating your nervous system, you start slowing the F down, you start coming home rather than trying to always be busy, keeping yourself busy, and you start, most importantly, feeling. That's when you start processing these things, and that's when you will start healing yourself. You can't think your way out of these problems. It's not a thinking problem. I spent most of my life when I first became aware of my trauma. I'm quite a go-getter. I'm quite, all right, let me sort the problem out. So I bought all the self-help books, started reading everything, started implementing it all. But it was from a logical, left-brained philosophy of like, you know, if I think my way out of this problem, then I'll be able to solve it, because all my life, that's what I'd done with my problems. But I didn't realize or have the capacity to understand that it was an emotional problem as well as the psychological. So I figured it out in my head, got over it in my head. I was like, yeah, I'm at peace with this, but my body still under stress, still full of anxiety, still unable to show up. And then when life happened, as it does, certain things in my life would just completely throw me off, completely overwhelm me, and I would get shoved back into where I started. And it would just be like, oh, everything was going so well, and now I'm back to square one again. So that's just my body responding to the stress. I'm already overwhelmed trying to do everything right. But the problem was I wasn't doing what was most needed, which was releasing how I felt about this stuff.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you know, like you go about day to day, whether it's trauma from when you were a childhood or something else in your life, or it's trauma from like day-to-day stresses, finances, moving, divorce, relationships, etc. Even the smaller things or the more day-to-day things that aren't as like big, let's call it, you know, you need to do things to actively make sure that you're letting go of those things and releasing them, because, you know, it's like you say, most symptoms and diseases are because of stress and trauma and emotions that are underfelt in the body. So one of the best ways to do this is obviously start creating safety in the body so that you can feel safe enough and connected with your body to start releasing these emotions and this stress in your body. And a really good way to do this, I mean, some people probably actually do this and don't realize that you do it. You do it.
If this is you, shout
so if
out.
this is you, I imagine there's going to be people like, oh my gosh, I actually do this. And if you think about it, like when a good way to do it, for example, is to rock your body. So rocking, for example, signals safety to the body, and that regulates your nervous system, makes you feel relaxed. Obviously, when you feel relaxed, you enter rest and digest. Your body starts working normally, but also you're more in tune with your body, and the emotions are free to come up and you're able to release them. Obviously, that looks like in a variety of ways. But the reason that this is think about it when you're a baby. How do we soothe babies? We rock them. So one of the earliest ways of feeling safe and when they're crying and to relax them is to rock them. So that's still innately in you. So as adults, you might notice that you do it in bed sometimes. Maybe you're like lying and you're rocking to try and help yourself sleep. Maybe you'll sometimes be sat and you'll be rocking as well. But this is, again, it's you innately knowing, actually, I need to rock, and it's a way to calm myself. So yeah, a practice to do this is to rock yourself. We have a really good video of this on our TikTok. We'll enter it into the show notes so you can see it. But an easy way to do it, lie flat on your back, somewhere comfortable. It can be a mat, sofa, bed, carpet, whatever you've got. Put your knees at a 90-degree angle. So like they're up like this, and just rock your knees side to side really slowly, and then increase the movement as you go. Take deep breaths as you're doing it. And as you do it, it's going to start signaling safety to your body. The longer you do it, the more consistently you do it, the more you're going to feel the benefits of it. And that's just one way to do it. Like I said, there's a video on our TikTok. You can have a look at it.
Yeah, we'll add it in the show notes so you can check it out and start doing it.
But, you know, for some of you, I know you probably already do it in other ways. Maybe you lie on your side and you rock in bed. That's quite common. I've heard a lot of people doing that, and that's a great way to do it as well. But yeah, so rocking is a good way to signal safety to the body, start relaxing yourself. And it's really great as well. For example, if you're struggling to sleep, it's a great way to like help you relax. So yeah, try it. Let us know how it goes. Check out the video. So yeah, that's today's tip on how you can signal safety to the body.
Start rocking your body. Doesn't that sound like an easy thing to do?
And that's the thing, you know, we don't realize how easy it is actually to bring our body into safety. We always think like nervous system regulation, it's so sciencey, it's so scary, it's so big. Actually,
what does it mean?
It's very, very simple. It's very, very basic. It's all about coming back to the body, coming back to you, coming home and creating safety and balance. Yep. That's all it essentially is. And when you realize actually how easy it is to do these things, very, very simple, very, very quick, implementable things that you can add to your day to improve the quality of your life and the quality of your health. So yeah, it's easier than you think.
There's essentially two paths to live in. There's one which is stress induced, which looks like stuck in survival mode. Life is a threat. Time is limited. If I don't do X, Y, and Z, then I'm going to perish and die. I need to get things done as quickly as possible. And then the other way to move is from a place of safety, which is I've got all the time in the world. You know, I feel safe and regulated in my nervous system. There's no rush. I feel calm, collected, and I'm just going to enjoy everything. And safety is in the present moment. Stress is you're in the future or you're in the past.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Think of it this way. This is like a really random way to like explain it. But you ever seen like a fashion show or like a catwalk, and you see like the models, they're like rushing down the catwalk, they're like strutting, and then the second they get behind, they're like being rushed to changing their outfits, changing everything. That's dysregulation. That's living in rush. That's living in stress. That's like all chaos. Now think of like when you see the Queen or the King now. They're not rushing for nobody. They're taking their time. They're waving. They're having a merry time. They are so chilled out. They're so stressed. So it's just like, you know, live like royalty. Take your time. Don't be rushing. You're not late for nobody. You're always going to be on time. It's going to be okay. Everything takes its own pace. And that's just the reality of it. You can't rush your way to feeling safe. You can't rush your way to signaling safety to your body and releasing your stress and trauma. It's a process. It's going to take time. So just be gentle with yourself and do it like royalty. Take your time.
I think that's the message that we're going to end on today. live like royalty. Take your time and then just enjoy the process. Check the show notes for the practice that we mentioned earlier, the rocking, because honestly, just doing that once a day is really going to change your life. And of course, if you do want to go even deeper than that, we have an entire process called Let That Shit Go, which is a somatic movement program that's going to take you through the process of first bringing the safety into your body so you can then, of course, feel safe enough to release the pent-up stress and stored emotions from the trauma that you've been through and come out the other end, the version of you that isn't burdened by all those emotional baggages that you're holding on to. So if that sounds like you, if it's something that you'll be interested in, the link is in the bio to that. Of course, we are so grateful for your time and energy and attention. And we will look forward to seeing you again next week. Yes. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, that was great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ciao for now.